Howdy and welcome to Moose Podcast 317. Top of the week to you folks. Here we are, the beginning of November, end of the year around the corner. And photography still is fantastically fun to do. And it's going to give in more so. We've got what's left of fall color and we got the beginning of winter. Lots of things go out to shoot, and I hope you're out there having a grand time. And I appreciate you stopping by and taking a little bit of your time to listen to the podcast. Also, want to thank my good friends at Bedford Camera, bedfords.com. Hey, these guys, I keep telling you, and more you are telling me just how amazing Bedford's camera is. They've got an amazing a bunch of inventory, great people, great service. Had a friend, she just went and got herself a Z9 and she had 24 120 and 100 400 and she made the call on Monday. She had it on Thursday across the country. No, no sales tax or shipping and the boost discount. Happy as could be. Thank you, Bedford Camera, for supporting us photographers and for supporting the Moose Podcast. We'll get right into this week's episode settings. Now, you might be wondering just where I'm going to go with that single word. There's lots of places I could go. Settings, as in beautiful fall color, or settings, as in the middle of a rut with some big game critter. But nah, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go the easy route today. I'm going to talk about settings, as in the camera. This past week, Nikon dropped firmware 3.0 for the Z9 and some other firmwares for D850 and other bodies. And that brought up a number of questions from folks, such as, did it change my settings in the camera? And yeah, it did. And somebody asked, I forgot who, I didn't write it down, asked, well, how did I determine the settings I use in the first place? And I said, you mean the Z9? He goes, no, I mean when you first started this stuff. Because there weren't really settings in a film camera. You had aperture mode, manual mode, you manually focused, and yeah, there was no real settings. That all changed with digital. Well, had to go back and look at some of my notes because my first settings were in the Coolpix 900. That was the first digital camera that I actually spent a lot of time with. I had the Kodak for a while, but um, it was that was hand-to-hand combat back then. We had three different files you had to manually assemble to get a picture. So nope. Then it'd be the D1. And well, settings. How can they make your life as a photographer easier? How can they make your photographs come out the way you want them? How can they provide you with the maximum amount of quality? There's a lot of things those settings can do. It's you got to start out by understanding that, in all honesty, that camera is really just an ungrounded, unshielded computer. What it is, right? It lives in the worlds of ones and zeros. And like any computer, like the one on your desktop, the one in your pocket, you are the one who drives them. I know it seems like they drive us, but actually, um, we're the ones that charge them. We're the ones that turn them on. We are the ones who can turn them off. And we're the ones who make them dance according to what we want to do. And there's the challenge, excuse me, is knowing what we want the camera to do. And well, there you have it. What do we want the camera to do? Now, I've been very fortunate that over the last 2 decades, I've had time to talk every so often with engineers and talk with some others who are a whole lot smarter than I am. And I've mentioned this before, when it comes to looking for new features, yeah, I'm not the one who's gonna be able to tell you about new features that, that aren't there that I would like to see, but I can sure fine tune what there's in there to how I shoot. And I think that's the key in understanding settings. So let's talk about some of the basic ones. Right off the bat, that comes from the factory with sRGB. Now, sRGB color space is what most people see when they're looking at images on the web. 256 colors. Now, a lot of this is I'm gonna talk about is generalizations. There could be totally a lot of exceptions to it, but most people look at colors on the web at 256 colors. That's your basic JPEG. Camera has in it Adobe RGB, and the last time they reported how many colors they had in Adobe RGB color space was 14 million. Now, 256 versus 14 million. Which one do you think is going to give you a better gradation between subtleties in color? Let's pick on a simple color sky and blue. There's so many different blues out there. Do you want to be limited to just those 256 or do you want all 14 million? Now you gotta keep in mind that in this photographic process, as far as our cameras, who I keep mentioning, I think of as that cold-hearted bastard. I say it affectionately, but when they go out shooting, right? That computer, that camera, it's one and the same. It's in the data collection business. I know we're in the romantic, factual, photographic business, but the camera, it's a computer. It's in the data collection business. And when it comes to making that photograph between the computer and the camera's got the greatest amount of data in which to collect to start the process. Computer only has what the camera delivers when it comes to our photographs. I'm going to say it one more time so people understand what I'm saying. In the process of photography, the, com- the camera has the greatest amount of data to start with, to end with in the photographic process. The computer only has the data the camera collected. And the way that camera collects data in a very large part has to do with our settings. And the first one I'm going to tell you is really important is color. So you need to get it off sRGB to Adobe RGB. Get all those colors. Now you have other settings with the Nikon. Okay, we have our picture controls, which I cannot emphasize enough is really important. I'm shooting raw files, and the raw data by itself is not a photograph, it's raw data. You need the instruction set that camera collects and creates every time you go click. If you think you go click and you only taking one file and only one file is being written to that card, you need to do some homework. There's a minimum of 5 files being written to that card every time you go click. Okay, and one of those, the most important, is the instruction set. You see that instruction set in brilliant color live and working when you go into Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. You see those sliders, black and white. That's the instruction set been exploded so you can then change the instruction set to change the raw file. But here's the deal. Again, the computer only has the information the camera collected. You're in the data collection business. You thought you were a photographer. Ha! It's data collection. And you've got to take that camera and have it collect all the possible data it can as best it can to have that big, beautiful image on that computer monitor. So then that picture control, you can head to my settings, go to moosepeterson.com. You head to the little magnifying glass, international sign for searching. And you type in Moose's camera settings, and you'll see all the settings there, which include all the settings for the Z9 with the firmware 3.0. Because, yes, the settings change. And next one after color is that picture control. People ask, how did you get those numbers? A really great question. These are importing settings. It started off way back when with the first camera, the D1. I spent one winter and I printed a ton. I spent a bunch of money a bunch of time making a ton of prints, changing those settings till I maximized the quality coming out of that camera with what the original scene happened to be and what I want to tell as a visual storyteller. Now, a big part of that is using now Nikon NX Studio, which, if you didn't know, just had an update on October 26th. Nikon's got their own secret sauce. Everything is there. You just have to do a little interpretation, knowing how Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom works. And that's how I got my original base settings for picture control. And then every time I get a new camera, uh, not as brand new, like I got a second Z9, not that new, but when the Z6 came out, or the Z6 II came out, and then the Z9 came out, a new model comes out, I go through the same process. It doesn't take as long or as much time as money, but I go and I fine tune the settings because every new camera has got better processing, and that allows me to push the envelope, for lack of better terms. So those are some of the basic settings, but some settings they don't change. They haven't changed since film days. One of the most important ones that isn't used is white balance. Talked about that a number of times in the last podcast. I'm not going to go over white balance again, but that's essential. So those are just some of the core settings in which we have to put into that data collection device called a camera. So we have the greatest amount of accurate information in the computer so we get the best quality of the photograph. And the underlying thing that I'm not talking about is, of course, that photo's got to be you. It's got to tell your story. We're just making sure all the components are there. That you can say the commas, the dashes, the quotations, the question marks, the exclamation points. We got to put all that into the verb, noun, adjective part of the photograph. Now, here's the part about settings, which can be a real challenge for folks, and it's what originally got me to publish my settings. So you could, if nothing else, when you start out, you have those settings to start with. When you pick up that camera, we all have different size hands. We all have a different way of thinking. We all have a different way of organizing. We're all a little bit different. And that's the beauty of photography because we can all go out and enjoy it and be different. But how are we going to control that camera? So when we want it to dance, it dances to our tune. That's the other part of settings that makes really a big challenge for folks. Well, the first one is just the exposure mode, aperture priority. I still run into a lot of people who insist on using manual, which is fine. But I always ask them, why do you buy a computer and not plug it into the wall? Because why would you buy a camera and not make the computer dance for you? Because then you use aperture priority, then you use exposure compensation, okay, and then that starts that process I've talked about quite a bit lately. But what about other features? So I'm going to talk about the Z9 because one, that's what I got sitting here in front of me, and two, it's what I use all the time. And I hate this part about me, but God, um, I am getting to the point where I can't remember all these previous cameras and all the settings and all the buttons like I used to. So the Z9 I shoot all the time. There's muscle memory. I can remember the stuff, but boy, you put a D6 or D5 or Z6 II in my hand, and all of a sudden I have to start pecking through menus like anybody else, which used not to be the case, but there you go, getting older. So the Z9, first of all, you've got the shutter release. That one seems obvious unless you have moved the focusing operation from the shutter release button to the back button. You have to go in the menus, have to change that. That means you have basically two fingers constantly working in this process. Now, the Z9 focusing is really important, and the Z9 does a beautiful job. And I'm talking about still photography, not video at the moment. But the Z9, you've got what I call the joystick on the back that you can move it around like a joystick and move the AF sensor around. I have the settings set so when I press that straight in, and now it goes in dynamic wide mode. Now, people ask me, how did I get to that point? How did I figure out I want to do that? Well, I listened to an incredibly great presentation on the Z9 that Nikon USA did, and they spelled out simply, if you got something coming directly down the lens barrel, pointing right at you. Okay, so it's just that whatever you're photographing is getting bigger and bigger the viewfinder. It's not talking about left or right, even a single degree, or up or down. We're talking about right down the lens barrel. Dynamic wide is your best mode to use. So that's how I figured out to depress that. I looked at the feature, I looked at the camera, I looked at where my two fingers are going to be because my index finger on my right hand is shooting the camera. So it's kind of committed, it's busy. And my thumb, it's back there either doing the AF on button, but when you set the joystick to do the dynamic wide, well, it's right there doing the same thing and it made sense. That's how you need to look at those settings. Now, I'm a completely change gears here in a second. I'm going to go from stills to video. Now, Nikon in their firmware 3.0 with video brought their high res zoom to the table. So if you're in 4K video, it does a power zoom in and out without having to zoom the lens. If you ever tried to do a zooming feature with a zoom lens, the exception would be the 24-120, which is just really smooth and easy to do this. You know that as you zoom, especially if you're doing handheld, it's really hard to keep all the elements in the viewfinder in their exact position. There's slight movement, and it can be annoying. Well, now you can do this in camera handheld with this new feature. It works really well. So, how do you make it operate? Well, you could go pecking through the menus, but then that kind of defeats the purpose, right? Of having a camera that you can keep to your eye and shoot video like I would do for like an air to air. So I had to program buttons, okay, settings, make that happen. So I have the FN1 as the zoom in, FN2 to zoom out, and that only happens when I'm shooting video. If I'm shooting stills, those buttons have other tasks they run for you. Now, this is where a lot of photographers get challenged because you've got to figure out photography, the problems you want to solve, how the camera can do it, and then program it to make that all happen. And remember what button you program to do this, that, or the other. Now, if you pick up your camera and it's hand to hand combat just to get a picture, you know your settings are screwed up. And I've picked up cameras and it's the weirdest feeling in the world for me. I've picked up cameras and I could not get them to work. It was a Nikon camera, and the settings had been so uh, altered that I literally could not make a photograph happen. And to me, that means that total confusion has to be overcoming that photographer when it should be nothing but fun and simplistic and just sheer enjoyment. So remember that when you're setting those settings and they get messed up, and it can happen, there is a reset. You can reset everything back to the factory numbers. And then it's kind of like, just like the analogy I'd have with Joe McNally, and he talks about flash. You know, you're going to have to do a whole lot of flashes. So you don't throw them all out at once. You put the first flash in there, you make it do what you want to do, and then you add the second light. And once those two lights are going the way you want, you add the third light. Same thing with camera settings. Don't change them all at once. Do one at a time. And if you have questions, even if you have another camera brand and you're wondering about this setting, that setting, and what button to put it to, you can still use my settings for the Nikon, and you can say, oh, this button back here, he's got this going, this button. and you can just grab that camera, move your fingers around, and figure out which finger hits what button and how important that feature is to you. Now, if you're looking at how I fit up in my settings, when it comes to all the different buttons and reassigning things, it's all set up with one simple premise: photographing action. Um, Whether I'm shooting a rock, or a coin collection, you never know what's going to happen. And I want that action ready to be captured. If I have to change settings to photograph action, by the time the settings are changed, well, action's done. So when it comes to settings, keep it simple. Stupid works really well. Think about what you shoot most often. Nikon has a number of, I guess you call them online classes that you can watch, and you can listen to some of the engineers and the logic they used in creating these features and assigning the buttons. But got to keep in mind that you're in the data collection business. And just like you have keyboard shortcuts that speed up Photoshop, you have button shortcuts on your camera to speed up that data collection process. It's all part of photography that, you know, the goal has always been for me to get everything out of the way between me and making that photograph. So my mind is only thinking about arranging those elements. And settings is one of the first and biggest way of getting a whole lot of things off the table. So then you can just go right to photography. So settings, look at them, practice them before you ever go out shooting. And then when you're out there, all they're going to do is help you be a better photographer. And that's the goal. You folks have a great week, and remember to make every click your story.